Put on there. Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, both physically in the room as well as I know we have a lot of folks that are online. We appreciate everybody's attendance today. It's a little hot. Can you turn the reverb down a little bit? I feel like it's going to go out of control here in a second. My name is Andy Levitt. I'm the chancellor here at UW Oshkosh, and we are delighted to have you all here tonight. And of course, we'll be welcoming our distinguished guest here just in a few minutes. But first, I want to thank the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research here at UWO. They are our host. This is a center which has been in existence now for a couple of years. The Whitburn Center's mission is to conduct nonpartisan, practical, applied research focused on evaluating and improving governance and professional management and public policy in Wisconsin and beyond. It's about good governance, small governments, good governance. And so that's what the focus of the center is. We're delighted to have a couple of board members here tonight. I'm going to just point them out here. We have Mark Roloff, who's our city manager here in Oshkosh. As well, we have Regent Emeritus Jerry Whitburn, who's with us here tonight as well. You may notice a connection between his name and the center. So Jerry really is the inspiration for what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. A former regent and also the person who hired me, which I'm very grateful for. So thank you for that. I guess you have to now claim that publicly, but there you have it. It's now my job. Oh, I want to just mention a couple other people here tonight. We also have County Executive John Daniels. John, where are you at? There he is right there. Yeah, what's that? And then we have also Dr. Stephen Hintz, who started our MBA program here several years ago. So appreciate you being here as well. With that, and also Regent Emeritus Tim Higgins, who is not responsible for hiring me, but he did vote for me, so I appreciate that very much. Thank you for that. So now it's my job to introduce tonight's moderator, and that's Dr. Michael Ford, and he's the director of the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research. And he is the Experimental Aircraft C.R. Meyer Endowed Professor in the Department of Sociology and Public Administration here at UWO. We have a lot of students in here tonight, and so I want you to kind of know how credentialed this guy is coming forward. He's a wonderful faculty member here. He has published over 40 peer-reviewed articles on public and nonprofit governance and one peer-reviewed book on education policy. In addition to his role here at UWO, he has served as an elected member of the Oshkosh Common Council, as a member of the Oshkosh Planning Commission, on the board of Clarity Care Incorporated, and as president of the Midwest Public Affairs Conference. He also writes monthly columns for the Public Administration Times and the Oshkosh Herald. Let me see here. Just got the last page of it here. His work has been featured in a variety of media, including Washington Post, the Houston Chronicle, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, the Associated Press, and Wisconsin Public Radio. With that, let's please welcome tonight's moderator, Dr. Mike Ford.
Popping up. All right, I get a new special microphone, which is good. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Chancellor Levitt, for those kind words. Special thanks to Jerry Whitburn, the chairman of our advisory board, and our founding donor, both for helping us land Governor Daniels for this event and for being so supportive of us. I also want to give a shout out to all our other advisory board members, including former Governor Scott McCallum, who didn't make the list because of my mistake, but is still very much the chair of our governing board. A couple other people I want to thank our Whitburn Center staff, Lisa Lewis, Dr. Samantha Larson, our intern, Liv Matrigano, who will be walking around with the microphone later on tonight, as well as Mike Leader from the Center for Civic Engagement, who helped us plan this evening, and Alex Talk and the Thompson Center, who helped fund this. Now it's my distinct pleasure to welcome former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read your impressive bio here. So Mitchell E. Daniels Jr. served as a two-term governor of the state of Indiana from 2004 to 2012 and is the 12th president of Purdue University from 2013 to 2022. He currently serves as a distinguished scholar and senior advisor at the Liberty Fund. At Purdue, Daniels prioritized student affordability and reinvestment in the university's strengths. He ended 36 straight years of rising prices by freezing tuition and mandatory fees at 2012 levels for all students. As a result, the total cost of attendance is lower today than in 2012, even without adjusting for inflation. Prior to becoming governor, Daniels served as chief of staff to Senator Richard Lugar, senior advisor to President Ronald Reagan, and director of the Office of Management and Budget under President George W. Bush. He also was the CEO of the Hudson Institute and had an 11-year career as an executive at Eli Lilly and Company. Daniels earned a bachelor's degree from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs and a law degree from Georgetown. He's the author of 3 books and a contributing columnist to the Washington Post. He and his wife, Sherry, have 4 daughters and 8 grandchildren. And I will invite you up, Governor Daniels, and we're going to have a Q&A, and we'll have about a half an hour at the end for all of you to answer questions. So join me in welcoming Governor Daniels.
First time I think I at least heard publicly that I'd been landed somewhere. You know, you gaffed me and brought me in the boat, Jerry? Was that how it happened? And I'm proud to have been landed, however.
Well, we're very happy to have landed you. And you even tolerated me driving you from the airport, which is great. So again, thank you so much for being here. Having read your bio and read your book here, and I highly recommend it. I'm just trying to suck up here at the start of the interview, but seriously, you've had a remarkable career in public service. You served in local government in the Indianapolis mayor's office, in the U.S. Senate, Reagan administration, George W. Bush administration, state government, academia. I mean, you've been all over the place. And I guess a really broad question is what motivated you initially to pursue a career in public service?
First thing I want to say is that you skipped over to me, the most important years I ever spent.
Yeah.
Those are the years in business.
Okay.
And I consider that public service too. If the American economy and the businesses that comprise it don't succeed, then the rest of then our other sectors don't succeed. We don't have the revenue we need to perform, to deliver the services government ought to deliver, and nonprofit. If nobody makes a profit, there's no money for the nonprofit. So
very true.
I just simply want. I always saw those years, first of all, as the most important I ever spent. I got the question many times in a couple of those other jobs. Okay, you got a chance to do all these varied things. Which experiences helped you most? And they usually thought I was going to say, I don't know, working in the White House or something. Yeah. No, not close. All the best lessons I learned and lessons that I tried to apply later on to serving our citizens better, serving our students and the Purdue community better. I learned in the competitive world, where the world measures you, and whether you either constantly improve or strive to, or you are overtaken. So I just want to say that to me, those were the most formative years that I ever spent, most valuable, and to me also deserve to be considered an important public service.
Fair enough. So what motivated you when you did go the public route, given your...
Well, the phone kept ringing, you know. I mean, I was interested. I was interested at the age of many of the students here. I'm not sure I knew why. I'm not sure at that time I had, in fact, I'm sure I didn't have a coherent view of a philosophy of what makes for a just society, what makes for a successful and flourishing society. I had to read a lot, learn a lot, make some mistakes to come to the view I finally did. But, but I was always intrigued by public life, and I was fortunate enough to be invited in, really, to a political campaign. And ultimately, one thing led to another, and a tremendous, at that time, boy mayor of my hometown, who became one of the most distinguished senators in American history, Richard Lugar, was newly elected and launching what became the total turnaround of my hometown. And after that, as I say, one thing just led to another. I was, I had students and young people for a long time I love the purposefulness of so many of today's young people, and somebody has told them they should plan their life. You know, you gotta have a career plan, which, by the way, I'm in favor of trying to do that. But I always have to laugh when I got the career planning question, because I said, well, you know, I didn't. Life planned me. Every so often the phone rang and it was something I hadn't thought about. And sometimes something seemed a little intimidating, but my advice to so many young people has been absolutely, if you think you got an idea where you want to go, have that idea, try to prepare for it, but stay loose, because your talent and your initiative will mean that things you didn't think of, opportunities will pop up, and one of them might be the right one.
Yeah. So keeping on the leadership theme, and I'm thinking in terms of public leadership, and I'm sure this would carry on into private leadership too. You wrote in 2014 that the two down payments for leadership are honesty and competency. I'd love you to explain exactly what you meant by that.
Do I really need to? I mean,
Yes.
maybe a better metaphor would be table stakes. I mean, if you're gonna ask your fellow citizens in a free society to entrust you with the money, you're going to confiscate that money. We call it taxation. You're going to take it from them because you or somebody thinks there's a better purpose than than what they might spend it on. And you're going to make decisions about that and other things that affect their lives. Well, at a minimum, you ought to accept the responsibility to do that honestly and ethically. And you ought to accept the duty to try to do it competently.
Yeah.
We all can fall short of that from time to time, but government unfortunately does in ways that are almost, they'd be comical if the consequences weren't so serious. So maybe, I know your terrific institute here works on this all the time. I really like learning about it. It's very important. If you read any of my stuff over time, it's always bugged me that simple competence, the duty to try to deliver public services effectively is such an orphan issue. And to people, as citizens, maybe we're just thrown in the towel, but we accept ineptness at every level of government in ways that we really shouldn't. So.
Is that new? Has that changed?
Well, I think with the growth of government, the incompetence has risen, and to some extent, maybe that's inevitable. But I mean, government more often, not always, more often, in my observation, does its job reasonably well, closer to the ground, closer to home, local level. Okay. Often, not always, at the state level. Rarely, if ever, at the federal level. And we're living in an era now when, good grief, student loan program, a 12-year disaster that gets worse every time they try to do something to it. The FAFSA business that they just went through is another colossal screw up. The charging stations that they can't build, the broadband they were going to spend billions on that none of it's out there yet. Okay. What's harder is to name something the federal government does that's done well. Again, I think we're too tolerant of that.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm hearing, potential solution, your point of view, more federalism, more devolution down.
Well, absolutely. We should absolutely devolve more functions. Okay. Get them closer to the citizen, closer to home, closer to where citizens can see them and evaluate them, and if need be, replace the people who are not doing the job well more easily than they can nationally. That's certainly part of it. I talked about things I learned in business that were so applicable. I used to do a lot of business with Walmart, where I learned their slogan: "You're not keeping score, you're just practicing." And this just simply means that people will say, well, you get what you measure and that sort of thing. And it's important everywhere. it's really important in the non-competitive sectors, in the non-productive sectors of society, nonprofit and government, because you can get away with incompetence too often. The accountability is not built in the way it is in the competitive world. In business, the world measures you. Your sales went up or down. You did better than your competitor or you didn't. Your margins are better or they're worse. So if you have a stock price, it went up and down. You can't get away from it, but you can in those other places. So it needs. I always said accountability needs to be transplanted there. And one of many ways to do it is to say, okay, we've decided we're going to take people's money and spend it on this common purpose that we think is important. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? And then let's figure out how to measure, are we getting it done or not? If we're getting it done, we should do more of it. If we're not getting it done, maybe we should take those dollars and use them in some other way.
Okay. So is that a management training thing that we should be? And I'm thinking here in the context of us teaching in an MPA program. I'm looking, one of our students, Jacob Flom, had to call you out. He's also an elected official, the Oshkosh City Council. I mean, what do you tell someone like that who's studying public management, but also on the ground as an elected official in local government? How do you ensure that accountability?
I think Jacob's got it figured out. I mean, first of all, he's willing to serve, and that's great. But obviously, he's doing it with a purpose, and if he's been a part of your program, he's been acculturated to think in terms of results. And I served President Ronald Reagan, who said a lot of simple but wise things, and he used to say that some people seek a high office to be something, others to do something. Try to be in the second category. And if you start with that mentality, I think first of all that's the right foot to get off on, and it will if you're able to maintain that outlook, it'll see you through certain aspects of public life, like criticism, and that always comes with an attempt to change anything.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me Jacob's probably got that figured out already.
We'll see when his grades come in. No. So it seems like you have, right? Sorry to keep harping on this, but you discussed competence, but let's go to the honesty. I mean, right now, it just seems like we're in this era where there are not consequences for dishonest behavior for our public officials.
Well, sometimes there are. Half the officials in New York are about to be indicted for something, and people get away with things probably, and we don't know. By definition, some of them we'll never hear about. But it's an extremely important thing. The real issue behind both of those things, to me, is confidence, public confidence. And to me, I really salute the sort of the essence, the foundation of the Whitburn Center here, because we ought to be. There are things you wouldn't think it. Listen to some of our current discourse, but there are a lot of things that we ought to all agree on. That ought to unite us. And this, to me, is the quintessential one. Whether you believe that. Whatever you believe about the proper sphere of government, whether you believe that it ought to be very, very active, very expansive, expensive, and intrusive, or like some of us, you're more skeptical of that, and you think that it ought to be limited in what it does, and be careful how big it gets. Regardless of that, whatever you think that proper sphere is, you ought to want it done well. I mean, if you believe in a big, very active government, you ought to be the most offended person of all when billions, jillions get spent and nothing good happens. I mean, what was it for? Just to feel good, feel virtuous? I mean, and it comes naturally, I think, to those of us who are advocates of more limited government, that it's a real offense against the public to take money from a free person and spend it poorly, and not do what you say you were going to do. And so because I think right temporarily, I hope, lack this in our country now. What we can disagree as strongly as we want to about the kind of government we want, but we want to have confidence in that government.
Yeah.
And incompetence, waste, and especially corruption or people serving themselves and not the public when they get their hands on public authority undermines confidence in the system. And I always felt it was really important part of my job to try to maintain the confidence of Indiana citizens in what we were doing. And these were two of the ways. I mean, we made a huge issue of ethics. We one of our first in a tumultuous first session where we passed all sorts of reform legislation. One of the first ones was a big ethics package. Our ethics laws were probably behind Wisconsin's. They were behind a lot of where I thought the standards ought to be. Things revolving doors and limitations on lobbying and we didn't have inspectors general to police the departments, all those sorts of things. Did them all, and just had a no tolerance policy for people coloring outside the lines. I've always said we did a lot of things in those years. They were very busy years, but for our state. But I always said if there's a tombstone, for me, it'll say he raised 4 daughters and fixed the BMV, because one thing that to this day people in our state and new visitors to our state go, wait a minute, it works. Why do we? When we got there, I gathered the people with room sort of like this, a little bigger, and all the folks who had agreed to come in and help us try to fix what was really a broken situation, and said, listen, we're going to try to fix everything, no matter how small, in this dysfunctional government we're about to come into. But I told our folks, I said, there's 2 things we're going to really concentrate on right out of the blocks: the Department of Revenue and the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Why? Because they touch almost every citizen. I said, and if we can get those right, people might go, oh, well, maybe this gang can shoot straight, and maybe I should listen to their next new idea.
Yeah.
And so we went to work hard on that, and within a couple 3 years, you were in. If you had to go at all, you were out of our licensed branch in 10 minutes or less. You were 97% likely to be satisfied as a customer. We measured all this every day, all that kind of thing. And because those were such visible services of government and ubiquitous services, I was really fixed on those. I mean, they were important by them, per se, but again, I thought it was so essential that people feel that the folks that are temporarily in office there really had their interests at heart and were determined to give them their money's worth and behave ethically as they did it. So yeah, it traces back to the need for us to feel confidence in our common enterprise.
Yeah, but that goes against some of the conventional wisdom with a newly elected official. They'll be told to get the quick victory, right? Not the highly visible one.
That may be what a political mercenary tells them. Is that what their conscience tells them?
True.
Their conscience should tell them that you're being entrusted here.
Yeah.
With, as I said before, you're going to eventually be entrusted with other people's money.
Yeah.
And to do things that are supposed to be in the common interest. And if that's not what you're there for, well, maybe you ought to let somebody else have a go.
Good point. Well, you alluded to this before. In fact, you said it. You referred to good government as an orphan issue, and you've written about this. And I think that goes along with what you were just explaining. Because that kind of implies that the public or the political world's kind of hostile to this concept of good government. I guess, why do you think that is?
I'm not hostile. I think maybe we're just resigned. We've seen so much crummy government. You think, well, that just can't be any better than that. But, it can. Wisconsin has, you've had some great leadership in both parties up here. I think you're generally seen as a state that has high expectations and changes leadership if you don't think that your expectations are being met. But no, I think, unfortunately, we've become too accepting of what we ought not tolerate.
How do we shake that up?
Well, I think I'd like to think that counterexamples are the best way. It's not quite the same. I'm not answering quite the same question, but our state, unlike Wisconsin, I read you right, had a long tradition of conservatism, not in the ideological sense we use it today, but in the resistance to change. Let somebody else try it. If good enough is good enough, and more than anything else, we were out to change that, because I think it's a cult. That's not a culture built for success in the world we're living in. I kept telling people, you tread water, you'll sink. You stand still, you'll be passed up. We've been getting passed up too long. It was that sort of an outlook. And so, we tried, people said, what's your biggest goal? And apart from even the biggest of the others, building the best business climate in the country and the strongest, most secure tax and fiscal posture in the country, all those things, those are all important. All the reforms, education, ethics, everything. But above and beyond all that was hoping to set a new tone, and a tone of high expectations. And in our case, that we're going to lead in the important areas of where a state should aspire to. We're not going to wait on Wisconsin or anybody else to, and maybe come along behind. And I would have the same sort of example trying to answer same sort of answer to your question. Counter examples can wake people up and say, well, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Was there pushback? I mean, I'm thinking both to that, but also the ethical.
Oh, well, ethical. Well, not really. I mean, nobody, I don't think, says, hey, let's have corrupt government. There's a pretty small constituency for that, at least vocal. No, as a matter of fact, it was kind of very ironic. Our loyal opposition they walked out of the Indiana House of Representatives. We had brought this massive set of legislative proposals, along with a lot of executive actions that we took where that was appropriate. And so just for partisan reasons, they didn't want us to get away with too much, I guess. And they walked out. It was astonishing to me. They walked out over the ethics bill or package. It just, I guess, happened to be the one in front of them. But the public sort of shamed them into coming back, and we passed it all. But no, I mean, there wasn't pushback that. There was a ton of pushback to almost everything else in the hall. Tim or somebody reminded me that, I've frequently quoted Robert Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, who said, progress depends on change, and change always has its enemies. And this is a reality that those of you who are here, and who I hope will, at least for parts of your working lives, give something to public service. Doesn't have to be something you do. In fact, I believe the best public servants are those who have experiences in the private sector, in the productive sector, and in other areas, and then bring that experience and those what they learned there to public service. That's just a personal preference, but those who do, I hope you do approach it with the idea that I'm going there to do something, to make something better, lift something up, but you have to understand that absolutely implicit in that is you'll take some grief for it, because every change that's worth making is going to disrupt somebody, discomfort somebody. It's going to threaten somebody's credentials, it's going to jostle somebody's status quo. And so they do what's human to do, which is do everything they can to stop it. And that includes, if they think it'll help them, attacking you. And it's one of the hardest things I had to learn was that there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't answer out and out falsehoods and correct misstatements or of fact or something, but you have to accept at some point that it's a cost of doing business, and that one of the best things I ever did was quit reading newspaper clips or news summaries as news evolved. Because I'd get all worked up over it and want to try to answer. You could spend all day trying to do it and you wouldn't get it corrected. Yeah. In the meantime, there were things forward motion you could have made, progress you could have made that you didn't.
So in that environment, after you accomplish something, a reform bill, and there's so much pushback, how do you bring people back into the fold that were pushing back against you after the fact? How do you articulate a place for them?
Well, first of all, some of the biggest things we did, by the way, and maybe there'll be time to talk about this. I watched Wisconsin because you were one of the dwindling number of places that actually has competitive politics, and it may drive you crazy, or you may think that obviously has its unpleasant features. But if you hadn't noticed, it's now the exception, not the rule. 40 of our states have one party rule of one kind or another. And that's not necessarily, in fact, it's not healthy at all. Now, it's not that long ago, but we had very competitive politics in our state during all the years that I served. We had a Democratic legislature, or half of the years. So some of the biggest things we did, I had to try to involve the other party, which is the essence really of our system. We don't solve things at gunpoint in this country. We solve them politics is about talking things out, and very, very rarely does one side get everything they wanted. That's it. That's what separated us from the tyrannies that dominated history before we got here. And so, a lot of times that meant giving somebody else the credit. Let the world think it was their idea in some cases. There were examples like that. Where that's not possible, where the other side just sees it differently or is determined not to let you have a success, you can try to find individual members of that party and give them all the credit they're due. If they have the courage to step over the line because they think a certain action is right. One of the biggest things we did, it's a fascinating case study, and I won't take your time with it, but we had like most states do, we had huge infrastructure needs, and it's really important to us. Our nickname is the Crossroads of America because of where we're situated. We're a distribution, manufacturing. So if you're the crossroads, you better pave the intersection, I used to tell people. And so we did something that shouldn't have been controversial, but it turned into a huge fight. We leased a toll road, an existing toll road, to a private operator who actually knew what to do, and we have a vastly better toll road because of it. But we got a huge check, and today Indiana, every year now, CNBC rates Indiana's infrastructure #1 in the country. It all goes back to that. It turned into a huge fight. Yeah. Our opponents were dead set to stop it. Lots of xenophobia, because there was the international company was going to be involved. There was very, very partisan, very bitter. But a handful of members of that party saw what it could mean, including 2 African-American Democratic senators. One of them, a wonderful woman from Gary who just passed away, has been on my mind a lot lately. So that's another thing you can do. Yeah. And the last thing I'd say is don't gloat. Even after a big win, a couple of the biggest, most contentious bills that we ever passed, I signed in the privacy of the office, or in one case, an airport. Purposely, there were no pictures, purposely not to rub it in, not to, or even to, leave any implication of that. Yeah. We were the first state to pass a right to work law north of what they used to call the Mason-Dixon line since the Taft-Hartley Act. Gave Indiana a huge advantage in recruiting new business. it was as tough as a fight can get. You had you had kind of experiences, I guess, like it's up here a couple of times. State House packed with people being bussed in from other states, to tell our legislators how to vote and so forth. And when it was over, I was coming back from somewhere, and I was in as I say, a little airport waiting room. That's where I signed the bill. I'm not sure there is a picture. And so I guess those are some of the rules.
Okay, good stuff. Well, now I want to push you on something that seems inconsistent with your good government message. So I'm reading your book, and I get to one of your columns you wrote where you say transparency's gone too far. Government transparency's gone too far. Again, that seems wildly inconsistent with the idea of good government, responsive government. I'm just curious what you mean by that.
Well, consistency. What is it? The hobgoblin of little minds. What's that?
Did you say have a little mind?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's inconsistent. Let me explain what I do think about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first of all, transparency, of course, important. We got awards for it. When I was working for my second, as I usually say, serving my second sentence in the federal government, when I was working at OMB early in this century, here's unlikely. I mean, a strange bedfellows thing. I teamed up with Ralph Nader. Some people here remember who Ralph Nader is. Because we agreed that it would be really important to put every contract the federal government signed on, up for public examination. Who got the contract? What are the terms? Who else bid? That sort of thing. And so, and at the state government, we won all kinds of awards for that. So, I mean, yes, of course, the public should see the decisions that were made, but not necessarily how the decisions were made. And so, this idea that the press or the public ought to be in the room while people are trying to work out what some of those compromises I was talking about. I mean, just think about it for a minute. There's a reason that the Continental Congress operated the Constitutional Convention operated behind closed doors and didn't take minutes, because they had duke outs, of course, over all the big questions that formed the Constitution. And yet they understood that when it was over, and maybe somebody else had won some of the big arguments, if there was going to be a new nation conceived in liberty, they were going to have to go out and advocate for it. And if that whole thing, there are just certain of those discussions, if you really want to get to what people keep yearning for now, why can't we work together? Why can't those folks, stop beating on each other and go get something done? Those things can't be done on the 50-yard line at Lambeau Field. You got to be able to. Was it J.P. Morgan who said something? They said, you're doing that behind closed doors. He said, well, that's what doors are for. And so there's a very important purpose for that. I'll tell you what I think was a big wrong turn. All, with the best of motives, the ones you just outlined. Yeah. And that's when somebody decided that emails were documents, and that, like public documents, that all of them ought to be available, to the whole world to see. Well, they're not documents. They're conversations. And yet, so people are very constrained if they actually say what they think, hey, Mike, what if we split the difference on this? Somebody takes them apart publicly because somebody goes in, accesses that email. I think we've carried public meetings way too far. I see a lot of subterfuge. Turns honest people into deceivers. They skulk around and have conversations. The law, some states' law says you can't. The regents or the walking quorum law, whoever it is, have to all be done in public. Well, there ought to be public meetings where they transact the business. But in deciding what to do, you've got to give some room for people to have open, honest conversations. And I'll give you one last example. I watched, and you can watch, the number of people who are willing to apply for, let's say, judgeships or appointments where they all have to be done in public. You know, some college presidents have to be interviewed in public. Well, what happens is half of the really good people you'd like to have just don't put their name up for something like that. They can't do it, professionally or reputationally or so forth. So you whittle the pool down and you lose good people who simply don't make themselves available. So for all those reasons, and I could give you examples of things where we found a way to, I don't want to say evade, but, operate somehow within the laws, really important achievements that would never have happened if we had slavishly, agreed to do the whole thing in public. You put, especially elected officials, you put everything out in public, they don't negotiate, they posture and play to the gallery, and you don't get anywhere.
Okay. So fair to say you think it's hurting compromise?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and I think we can have tons of transparency, more as a rough guide. I guess what I blurted out a little bit ago, the decisions can be made in public, but deciding what decision to make, you have to leave some room there for people to have give and take and be able to be honest with each other and not worry that before the meeting's over, some idiot is tweeting it all over the internet.
So I could talk government all day with you, but we're going to have to pivot to higher ed. So I got the chancellor sitting right in front of me here. So no secret, you had options. There was speculation you were going to run for president. You had private sector options, and instead you accepted the job as the president of Purdue University. What inspired you to do that?
Well, I wasn't inspired. The phone rang, and it was about the last thing. I told him no 2 or 3 times, but I'm so glad. I'm so glad it came along, and I'm so glad I did it. And it was a terrific experience, but I didn't plan it, and I didn't scheme for it, and I didn't see it coming. And for quite a long time, I thought it'd be just the wrong move to make. It was not at all. People used to ask me as I got closer to the end of the previous job, people say, "What are you going to do next?" And I said, I'm trying not to have any idea. I wanted to, let me finish this job. I want to, we're going to work to the very last day. Then there'll be time to sort it out then. And I said, I don't know what it'll be, but it'll be in the NDB zone, by which I meant none of your damn business. Meaning, I was all those years of being in something where people think they should know where you are every minute and who you're talking to every minute and read your emails and all that. I was ready to be done with that. Didn't quite escape, but no, I mean, the short answer, I guess, is that when I really sat down and thought about it, given the kind of University of Purdue is and could be even more so in this world, this information age, the age where technology and science is driving economic success, societal success, national success. I couldn't think of, when I stopped and thought about it, I couldn't think of a job, a chief executive job. By then I was sort of accustomed to those. In the state that where my feet are planted, they could do more. Other than the job I was leaving, I couldn't think of a job where if you did if you performed well, you might advance those goals more. And so that's kind of why I went to Purdue. And I saw it could be an economic engine for the state. It could train the sort of young talent that Indiana and the nation needs so much. Norm Augustine, famous businessman and public servant, had just led a national commission the year before on dangers to the American economy and competitiveness. A bunch of very specific recommendations. Number one was, first thing we got to do is graduate at least 10,000 more engineers a year. I go, well, okay, let's see. We did this right. Purdue could handle the first 7 or 8%, Yeah. Somebody can pick up the slack. And so that's the sort of thing we did.
Okay.
And, it was very, very fulfilling. And I think we have reason to believe that we advanced the ball.
It's maybe MPA professor Mike talking, but when you got there, I mean, how do you size up a job that big? I mean, where did you begin? when you walk
Yeah,
in the
well, I didn't know anything, and I was so wrong about a bunch of things.
Like what? You got to give us some examples there.
Well, here's one. They were on a track which I thought was the right track to become more selective, and they were the student body had been managing it down slightly, about 28,000 and change, I guess, the year that I showed up, and smaller than it had been, and not for the wrong reasons. The wrong reasons, which some schools I think were pursuing, was ratings and all that business, rankings. No, their graduation rates were not as good as they should be, and the idea was, we're not doing a student a favor if we admit a student who can't make it. And Purdue has maintained, this was a big goal of ours, to continue maintaining rigor. It's harder to get a good grade at Purdue than it is at almost any other school you can name. And so, but I was wrong about that. And it didn't take me long to figure it out. Now, wait a minute. First of all, we're a land grant school. We were put here to expand, it will open the doors of education to the broad middle class and the rest of society, not just the elites who were going in the 1860s. And back to what I said before, our mission's never been more important. The nation needs exactly the kind of people, the talent that we specialize in. And so we headed the other direction. And today there are over 40,000 students there. And by the way, graduation rates are up. The standard, the academic readiness of the students applying keeps going up. We thought if you get bigger, you'll inevitably be taking students slightly less ready, and no, it hadn't worked that way at all. And the standardized tests, GPAs, quality of the schools they graduate, high schools they graduate from, keep going up even as we got bigger and bigger. But I was dead wrong about that early on.
Okay. Any early mistakes you think you made?
Oh, sure, on a daily basis, I guess. Too many to remember. But by the way, I in the bottom, there's this dog-eared legal pad. It's been in the bottom drawer of 3 or 4 different desks or workstations now, where I try to write down the big mistakes, because I don't want to lose sight of those, and because you don't want to repeat them or something analogous to them. But yeah, of course. But I think we got more right than wrong. There was a very legitimate concern for a couple reasons when I was announced in that position. One was just maybe he's just using it as a temporary holding place, as he's really interested in other things, politics or so forth, which was not the case. I wouldn't have taken it if I wasn't fully committed to trying to do it well. But another one was, what, the guy didn't know anything. He's not lived in our world. And that was true. But that's not always a big detriment. In particular, I would contend in a sector like higher ed, which clearly was then, you can clearly see it now. It was pretty obvious 13 years ago that some things were problematic. Cost was out of control. People were starting, even then, if they look closely, to question the value. Are these young people, did they really learn what that diploma says they learned? And, wait a minute, if this is supposed to be a place where people encounter different ideas, and if it's supposed to be a model of a free society in which we settle things by open debate and so forth, then what's this business where everybody thinks the same? And if you don't, we're going to, ostracize you. So all those things were out there. It may have helped, that I had spent the previous 10 years going all over a very diverse, pretty typical state. We've got a little of everything, Indiana, rural, urban, reasonable demographic mix and all that. And hearing about this in people's homes and businesses in a way that folks whose entire frame of reference was inside the academy hadn't. But anyway, so I had so much to learn, but also I think I had to absorbed a few things that were important. Just them as simple as freezing tuition, which was such a radical notion at the time, but it was meant to send a signal. Then it turned out we could do it again, then we could do it again, do it again. We're still doing it. I thought, here's something I was wrong about. I thought if a school like ours doesn't begin to respond to the cost problem, somebody's going to make us do it. And that's the second best way. Either the marketplace is going to rebel and students are going to quit coming, or the government's just going to do it with a sledgehammer. And so better we show some sensitivity to this first. Well, I was wrong about that. Years later, until the last maybe 2 or 3 years, higher ed kept on keeping on with increases of inflation. And
it certainly seems, at least here, we've hit an inflection point. I know we were speaking a little bit on the drive from the airport about some of the challenges we've had at UWO over the past couple of years. And we could go into a ton of specifics, but I mean, one of the big ones is a growing public narrative that college just isn't worth it. And it's a leading question, but I'm curious. I mean, what do you say to those people that say college isn't worth it?
I was doing a radio interview in my first few months somewhere, and the interviewer said, "So, what's your biggest goal at Purdue?" And in this new job, and impromptu, I said, I said, "We're out to deliver higher education at the highest proven value." And 10 years later, I'd never improved on that. That just sort of became our little slogan. So highest proven value. Proven goes to the fact that, and this is one reason that tuition got out of expense, costs got out of hand. You'd really like to be in a business where there's no quality measurement. Nobody can tell. Nobody really can tell. Is a B in chemistry at Notre Dame, did you actually learn more or less than somebody who got a B in chemistry at Madison? And so forth. And so because of that, people associated cost with quality. Well, if it costs more, it must be a better school. Well, that game was beginning to run out even then. So, at our university, students, or a sample of every class, takes a critical learning test on the way in. They take the test on the way out. We hope we're finding that they're actually gaining ground in that area, but we accept the responsibility to prove that what they're paying, that our students are paying that money for, is actually delivering. And there are other measures, but that's the big one. Now, value is the big question. So what's value? The basic equation of life is quality over cost. Both are important. And we invested heavily in quality, and we worked hard, as I said, to fight grade inflation and analyze it, keep it in front of our faculty, and explain to our students, it's a good thing. The world will know that your 3.1 is probably tells them more than a 4.0 from a school where everybody gets 4.0. But then cost, of course, was the other part of that. It's so simple and obvious, but you didn't hear the word value, and I didn't hear the word value in higher ed till maybe the last 5 or 6 years. Now it's all you hear. It should have been all along.
Since you brought up your GPA test scores, another thing you've written about was universities getting rid of the SAT, ACT as requirements. And you said, I hope I'm quoting you accurately, that you wouldn't be in favor of that, but you do think schools should prioritize grit.
Well, that's two questions, but you're right on both. No, we didn't give up standardized testing, and we're not. I said I can't say that anymore. Purdue did not.
You can.
Well, I do still have a formal relationship with them. I guess I can use the first person. But anyway, Purdue has continued to require standardized testing, and will for empirical reasons. It's not dogma of some kind. We look at it very intensely every year. What's the purpose of the admissions office? To find students who can meet our standards and succeed. And we look at it every year. Our statistical whizzes, poured through all the data, and there was no combination. There is no combination of criteria. We look at other things too, of course, GPA, quality of the school, what kind of school the student came from, quality of the essay, all that. There's no combination of criteria that omits standardized testing that is nearly as predictive of success in graduation as the algorithm we use that includes it. If you've noticed in the what I considered a sort of rash and basically irrational or maybe even ideologically driven flight from standardized testing. Now, of course, we had COVID where there are practical reasons that there weren't testing centers, all that. But on the backside of that, a lot of schools said no, and now they're coming back. The Berkeley faculty demanded the reinstatement of SATs. MIT reinstated SATs. Princeton reinstated SATs or ACTs and so forth. So, I mean, that's good news, by the way, because people in this society seem to have a hard time ever admitting they were wrong. And in a few cases, and this is one, I didn't hear any apologies, but I did hear, but you did say people reversing field, and Lord Keynes once said, when I find I'm wrong, I change my mind. What do you do?
That's a classic. I like that one. Well, let's talk about online education. I can objectively say that we have the best online MPA program in the state of Wisconsin.
Right.
It's also the only one, which makes it.
So it's also the worst one in the state of Wisconsin.
Well, I'm the glass half full.
Oh, okay.
Guy. We're the most graduates too, though. That's a metric. But one of the things you did that got a lot of controversy and still talked about, was very influential, is you acquired Kaplan University, or Purdue did when you were there, and launched Purdue Global. I guess what inspired you to spearhead that, see that opportunity, and
Yeah, well, there was opportunity is the right word. There was some opportunism involved, but what motivated me was that anybody could see that online education, it might or might not, and it has not, and a good thing it has not, supplanted, as some people thought it would. It would, technology would just sweep away as they said, sage on the stage, the professor in-person education, which I think is still an essential part of a high quality higher education. But anybody could see that online needed to play a bigger role, and we were just not getting it done. We were tripping all over ourselves. I made a practice of writing up a self-evaluation over Christmas break and giving it just to the board. And I tried to be as tough a grader as I hoped all our, Chem E professors were.
Yeah.
And 3 years in a row, the worst grade I gave myself was for our failure to make real progress in developing online courseware and learning the techniques of effective online education, really delivering for the student. So that was a piece of it. And meanwhile, I was watching and learning. I had been on the board I'd been talked into being on the board when I was in public office of WGU, which is one of the earliest and biggest Western Governors University and online outfits. And that's the first exposure I'd had to any of that. That's where I came to understand, holy smokes, there are twice as many adults out there who started college and didn't finish as all the college students on all the four-year campuses that we pay so much attention to. It's like, at the time, it was like 36 million to 19 or 20. It's still about that ratio. It's amazing. And I'm not talking about people who never tried college. I'm people who went and didn't finish. And at that point, I thought, well, they got some advantage out of it. No, data say they didn't. What they got out of it, they got almost no advantage in terms of career advancement. What they got was cost and probably some student debt, you know. So the big societal problem and a big opportunity, because there's a ton of talent out there. And if those folks can get to a credential and get to a new set of skills, their life gets better, and the economy gets better. We're a land grant school.
Yeah.
So when you thought about it, I thought, in 1869, opening the doors of education meant, the farmer's kid and the plowmaker's kid. In 2014, 15, 16, it just seemed to me it was time to expand as I said, the next concentric circle of the land grant mission. We couldn't stop at age 22 or 24. Now, sometimes fortune plays a hand. Meanwhile, one of the big for-profit online organizations was owned by the Washington Post companies, had decided that they should get out of that business, or at least get out of the for-profit end, not because there's anything wrong with it, not because they weren't doing a pretty good job of it, at least relative to their competition, because, the government had decided to go on a jihad against that particular part of the sector, where there were bad actors, but there's some very, terrible results in other sectors too, like community colleges. They're not going after them. But anyway, the owner of the Post companies was somebody I knew, and we each knew somebody. I had been lamenting to a friend who used to work for them about my online views and my online problem, kicking myself to him. And he talked to him, to Don Graham. So Don Graham calls me up and he says, this is probably going to be the shortest phone conversation you have this fall, but by any chance. And the end of that call, we had set up a meeting, and a month later we had a MOU, and 5 or 6 months later we owned what is now Purdue Global. Maybe more than you want to know, but it was a very interesting story. Today we have 37,000 students, almost the size of the Purdue campus. The average student at Purdue Global is a 30-some-year-old single mom. 50% chance or more that she or he is a minority. We have veterans. We've had grandparents graduate at the same ceremony as a granddaughter. A lot of fun. And so when we did it, there was change has its enemies. I mean, huge furor. Oh, you're going to cheapen the place. You're going to destroy the value of Purdue degrees. What are we doing in this? You're just doing it for the money, and all these things. Boy, you don't hear that anymore. The most glorious thing, I had them start having the commencements for the Purdue Global folks on the Purdue campus. They used to have them, on the coast and closer to turned out students wanted to come to the campus. They wanted to feel part of this. They wanted to feel like Boilermakers. So we started having the commencements there. And you want to get emotional. I mean, just go to one of those and see the kind of folks and see how joyful they are that they found a way to take this step. They thought life had passed them by. And we welcome them. And now our folks are so proud to be part of, again, this separate but closely related mission.
Are you seeing the outcomes you expected?
Yeah. I mean, we trace, salaries go up. Okay. A significant number of them get promoted within a short time of, actually achieving the degree. And it's a struggle. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, these folks there's a reason didn't often have never tried to go back to school. They got, as we say, life gets in the way. They have family obligations and jobs, and they may be taking care of a parent or something. And so the curriculum is not easy. I mean, there are demands. If you don't do your homework, you're out, things like that. So it's an achievement when they do it, and the world recognizes that.
Okay. So we've had significant turmoil on college campuses in the U.S. over the last year or two.
No, I'm not paying close enough
All right,
attention.
next question.
Yeah.
You got to turn on the news. You're,
Yeah.
you're too retired here. And here in Wisconsin and elsewhere, there's been a lot of pressure on universities to either take official positions or not take official positions. And it just struck me that you, in your position as president of Purdue, is you were writing about everything, taking positions on everything.
No, I disagree with that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all,
Demonstrate.
you're absolutely right. Institutions should not take positions. Purdue University doesn't take positions. Our trustees passed what we remember as the Calvin principles. They were drafted by a person by that name at the University of Chicago in the 60s, Vietnam time. And at that time, the Purdue board, among, as many others did, passed a resolution that said, unless it affects the university directly or the higher ed directly, the world in which we operate, that, we're a place that we're to host debates, not to enter debates, more or less. Yeah. It was a good rule then. It's a good rule now. Schools that didn't do it regretted it and are scrambling to get back to that position now. Yeah. That's the right one. Now, I was very careful on the day that I said yes to Purdue University. I still had 6 months to go in the previous job. And so I'm in the, thousands of people showed up in this for the board of trustees announced they were going to pick the show. They were going to unveil the new, sucker. And so we got thousands of people in Elliott Hall there. And I, very, very short talk said how much I was honored and was looking forward to the job. And I said, in respect for the public institution that Purdue is, from this day, from today on, not when I'm done with the governor, but today, I will abstain from any partisan political activity. And I did. And then I did for the next 10 or 11 years. So never a word, never attended anything that had anything to do with, certainly partisan politics. Yeah. And I did, and when I did an interview or write a column or something, it was never about that. Sometimes I wrote about higher ed, or things that I thought had a direct bearing on our young people. But no, I think I stayed on that side of the line.
Was it ever hard? Not stepping?
No, it was comfortable.
Yeah.
I always said, I'd taken a vow of political celibacy. As the climate out there got more and more unpleasant, and again, this what I hope is this temporarily toxic moment we're in, it became more and more comforting. And by the way, college presidents who now are under that sort of policy are going to find it very comforting to say, well, as I did many, many times, oh, yes, I have views on that, but it just wouldn't be appropriate for me to spout off.
Okay. So we did a survey at UW, well, the UW system, or Universities of Wisconsin, we changed the name. They had to deal with freedom of speech, freedom of expression a couple of years ago. There was debate about it, but we won't go into that. But two of the results that really stuck out to me were findings that 31% of UW Oshkosh students stated they were interested in discussing controversial topics, which means almost 70% aren't. And only 12% said they're interested in having their views challenged. And I'm curious if you have any suggestions of how, whether it's faculty or university leadership can try to foster students to be more civically engaged while not taking positions on formal issues.
Well, it certainly ought to be a central objective. And frankly, it ought to be a student's objective in coming to campus in the first place. I mean, I've read all those surveys, and you're not sure exactly what's being said. I think in many cases we know that students are saying, not necessarily saying I wouldn't want to have be in a debate or hear views different than mine. They're saying I'm afraid to because of what can happen in a cancellation world that we've been living in. And the problem of self-censorship is a real one. But let's just take them at their word. If in fact people said, I'm not interested in hearing views that differ from mine, I'd say, well, then what are you paying this money for? If you already know it all, I was always under the impression that you're spending all this money to come here because of what you don't know. Right? So, I mean, I don't get that. And secondly, learning only advances through the collision of ideas. This is why groupthink and monolithic enforced conformity of thought, which unfortunately has become a fact of life at far too many American campuses. We're just faculties are 99-1 and there are sort of thought police have been running around, and either stomping on people for saying something, even a word that they don't like, a joke they think is wrong, or worse yet, compelling speech that conforms to the dogmas of the day. So that's wrong anywhere in a free society. That is really wrong on a college campus for two fundamental reasons. One, these are places where that exist to advance knowledge and transmit it to oncoming generations. Knowledge only advances when ideas collide. When you stifle the dissenter, the heretic, the contrarian, first they may be wrong, in which case the side with the correct argument strengthens their argument by learning how to refute the wrong argument. Or they might be right. John Stuart Mill said, both teacher and student go to sleep at their posts when there's no opponent in the field. When we all think exactly the same thing or don't ask if there's a different point of view, knowledge doesn't advance. So one thing that's wrong with enforced conformity of thought, consensus, this word that we should be so suspect of when somebody, wields that in an argument. Hush up, because the consensus is that, this is right and this is not. It strikes at the heart of the academic enterprise. And so that's one. The second thing is, especially public university, but I'd say any university, if one of its primary missions is to prepare young people for productive lives, right along with that is to prepare them to be contributing citizens of a free society, a society by consent of the governed. And so the campus itself should be a model of open debate and the clash of ideas and working things out and so forth, instead of a place where people are afraid or scared to death to say something that they think, or something they think, that their peers or the professor might penalize them for. So I hope we grow out of this. And I think there are signs of this. I was trying to evaluate it, coming up here today, I'm thinking I'm probably going to write a column about it. I'm trying to decide whether, the free speech team is advancing the ball or not. There've been some gains that you can point to, but there have also been some setbacks. I saw today, Cornell University, 100 students. Now, I don't know how many kids go to Cornell, but it's probably more than 10,000, but it doesn't take a big percentage. 100 students shut down a career fair where their fellow students, are trying to get a job because some of the companies there and do defense work. Well, so this isn't, shouting down a speaker. We've seen so many of those, or, bullying some speaker off a stage. That's bad enough. In this case, they were they were interfering with the career opportunities of their fellow students. That should not be permitted. One thing I was hoping we had learned last spring, trying to recover our footing on these basics. There's a big distinction between speech and conduct. Say anything you want, no matter how stupid, even insulting, but conduct that interferes with somebody's ability to go to class or go to work in the campus building or go to a career fair. No. And, I think a few prompt expulsions would be highly therapeutic and absolutely called for.
Now it's interesting. I mean, you brought up the Cornell story. I saw that. And I can say one of the frustrations as a faculty member, and I think as even students share this frustration at a regional comprehensive, is that high profile incident happens at Harvard, happens even at Madison at a flagship, and then it gets branded everywhere. And I think the experience at the regional comprehensives are a little different. And I swear I'm going somewhere with this. I'm really thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you see the regional comprehensive university in the universe of higher education today and in 10, 20 years, because I think we're kind of looking for that next phase. Around here, we call it UWO 2.0, but where do we go? Where do we fit in as a state university that educates mostly state kids at a still pretty good affordable rate?
Well, it won't come as news to you to say that all over the country, as far as I could tell, schools like this one have been struggling as enrollments, particularly in our part of the country and east of here, as enrollments have dropped both for just population reasons and at least for now, preference reasons, fewer students choosing the four-year route. And meanwhile, if I read the data correctly, the bigger schools are maintaining their enrollments, and some of it's got to be coming at the expense of the regionals. I know that's the case in our state. Schools in our state, I'm worried about some of them that have made major contributions, and we need them, but they're probably hurting worse than you are. So I think we've got sort of systemic problems here that will continue to be headwinds. I don't have a magic answer other than to work very hard on value in the way we discussed it earlier. And there's some great value. I'm sure here, and a couple of our comparable schools at home, I think a student gets a great education. They're probably living closer to home and saving money that way. Living near the school and saving money that way. But it's a moment of some, I think, hazard in that sector.
I think that's well said. Looking back, I want to make sure we leave a half an hour for Q&A from the audience. Anything that you're particularly proud of in your career? To kind of sum up, that's a big thing. I know you mentioned your.
No, they're not much. I don't know. I did.
No,
it pretty much wasted my time.
Still time, but something that stands out.
Yeah, well, of course, they're, and then that's the fulfillment.
Yeah,
that's the reason why you learn. I was a slow learner, but you learn to shrug off. Bogus criticism, even personal and insulting criticism. I used to tell our folks all the time, and they'd get more upset than I was at some points, somebody's just saying something just outrageously wrong or harsh or something. I'd say, right. And I told them something about Indiana farm woman that had told me along the way. She said, "Hey, Mitch, don't forget, dogs don't bark at parked cars." And I said, we're not parking the car. The dogs are going to bark. And the things that the things that I remember best are the ones that were the hardest to get done, but that had the biggest, almost axiomatically had the biggest impact. I mean, I talked about the infrastructure thing we did, and I can name a whole lot of things we did that I hope will have lasting impact and make the lives of people in our state or elsewhere better. Clearly, I feel that that Purdue University is a stronger, bigger, stronger, better respected school today than before. So sure, there's a lot of that, but I tend to focus on the other side of the income statement.
I'll have to ask you about that one too, but I do want to, for the students in the room to point out that he didn't mention, winning the gubernatorial race. He didn't mention getting hired at Purdue. He mentioned that he did once he got there.
No, of course not. Because that's never, if that's the point, then you're on that be something, not do something. You're on the wrong side of that dichotomy. On the night that I got elected, it was a big damn deal. Our side had been out for many, many, many years and so forth. But I said that night, in front of thousands of wildly enthusiastic people, I said, listen, don't anybody here make a mistake. Tonight's not the goal, was never the goal line. This is the starting line. We didn't go through all this to win an election. In fact, I had very strong views about how people should campaign. There's a whole other subject. I'm not trying to open up a new one, but I always tell our folks, the way you campaign, you got to win. I mean, that's job one. But, we want to campaign to govern, not just campaign to win. What did that mean? Well, it meant, for one thing, we never ran a negative ad about an opponent, ever. One day I knew we might need at least some of their supporters to at least give a fair look to things we wanted to do to improve or to change our state. Another thing it meant was that we were very specific, probably to a fault. Here, if you hire us, and I always put it that way, if you hire us, I'm on a job interview here. If you hire us to do this, here's what we'll do. Well, number one, people deserve to hear that. Number two, if you've done that, instead of just throw mud balls for 18 months and, and throw up a bunch of, silly looking ads of you hugging or pretending you're listening to somebody, all that. If you do that, then you have every right to go try to make those things happen. You didn't sneak up on people. We said, here's what we'll try to do. If they vote for that, you have every right. Then you would go around and say to people who don't want to do it, so listen, we told folks we'd do this. So if you're a teammate, you got to help do it. And if you're on the other team, we have a right to advance these ideas. So,
well, then let's talk the other side of the coin. And again, I asked that too as a note for our students, for a life lesson here. I find some of the most successful people have failed a lot because, like you said, that's the other side of the coin. Where have you learned things that you've regretted? Yeah, well, I guess the thing I regret the most is that I did not stay in touch with old friends, and I didn't make as many real close friends along the way as maybe I could have. Now, some of that comes with the territory. I'm a social animal. I like people, but still, as you students move, as you're going to, probably faster than you expect to positions of leadership, you will get into places where you can't be everybody's close friend. Because you're gonna have to make decisions in the interest of the enterprise or the city or the state or the cause, whatever it is. And so there's that, and you can get too busy, and I'm all of that. But I gave a commencement speech on was it 2020? Anyway, it's been whole books now, lots of books and studies done recently that this really troubling thing. I hope it's not as big a problem with anybody in the room. The loneliness of people, the isolation, social isolation of people, especially younger people, is bothering all kinds of folks and is now well documented, and it's a problem. We got to figure out ways to make that better. But I
I said in that speech to our students that I've done a bad job of this. It was always, I'll get in touch with those folks again next year, and there'll be time later on.
Yeah.
I didn't do it, and that was a mistake. And, I can't blame it all on the fact that I had 80-hour-a-week jobs or the kind of job where you have to keep a little distance.
It was not the answer I expected, but it was honest and it was good. So thank you for sharing that. Well, why don't we turn it over to the crowd? Liv, if you want to grab the microphone, everything you ever wanted to ask Governor Mitch Daniels, we're afraid to ask, you can do right now. Why don't we start right here in the front?
I have two things, a comment and a question. My comment is, if you're going into public service, I think your motto should be, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to make a difference.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just wondering, since you're into multiple ideas and viewpoints, how do you feel about the banning of books?
Well, it's a bad idea. I think we can draw a couple distinctions. A big one is, there's a bright line for me between K-12 education, or certainly K-something education, and higher education. On a college campus, any book, there's no justification I can think of. The clientele, so to say, the students are older by that time. Hopefully, they've developed a little independent judgment, critical thinking of their own. There's more than one class to choose from, more than one teacher. There's more than one book. That's a little different. People talk about banning books when they're talking about maybe a second grader shouldn't be exposed to certain things. I think there are limits there that are entirely appropriate, and communities ought to make those decisions on their own. But that's not banning, but the book is still available somewhere. The question is whether there are some limits, at least for younger people, that aren't appropriate. And I can justify. I don't call that banning books. And banning books is another form of banning speech, and I've very pretty close to absolutist views about that. Thank you.
Okay. Executive team.
First, I want to thank you both. I think Bob LaFollette could be looking down and understand that the Wisconsin idea is alive and well in this room tonight. So thank you for that. One of the issues that I face, and I really want to get your opinion, is mission creep. Policy is always greener on the other side of the fence. In a time where I see a National Education Association dictating policy to local school districts, or Wisconsin Counties Health Association taking a position on the Israeli-Gaza conflict, and up until recently, before it was discouraged from the state, our county board would take up resolutions telling the state what they needed to do with their policies. In the organizations that you face, whether it be education or government, how did you keep your team and your focus on your role and responsibility and not get outside?
Right. No, I think there are two. Thanks. I think there are two somewhat different phenomena here. And, public agencies they're free to pop off on subjects they don't know anything about and don't have anything, don't have any direct authority over. But, I think they're wasting their time they could be better spent on their real assignment. Now, mission creep is a real issue. It's a natural tendency of every bureaucracy. And, the most effective, or I would say the most responsible outlook, let's say for a nonprofit entity, is to go out of business, to be so good that it solves the problem that it came into existence to have a sincere concern for. Of course, nobody wants to do that. Because you can't admit success, you can't admit progress, because then what do we do next year? Or we won't be able to raise as much money and so forth. So that's one reason. It absolutely requires somebody to exercise some discipline about it. And I was constantly swatting down ideas to start a little something here, another center a little here. In fact, one of the best things I think anybody with a given that kind of responsibility should do is constantly look to prune the bush, or at least challenge. What are we doing now? You know, Andrew Carnegie, the great industrialist, and later gave all his money away, great philanthropist, one of the greatest we've ever known. But when he was running U.S. Steel, had a meeting every January 1st or some right around New Year's, and said, okay, boys, back then it was boys. Okay, boys, what do we throw away this year? That was the first question. And that's always a good question to ask. What are we doing? Government never asks this question. But it happens in business too. It happens everywhere. What are we doing that just isn't working? What are we doing that, hey, we pretty much did that. It did work. We don't have to keep on. We don't have to expand it. And what are we doing that might be working, but there's an opportunity cost? There's something we could be doing that's even more valuable. And so I think you have to constantly be vigilant about that. And on the other side, if you have big goals, I always tried to tell the folks I was working with, look, we want to shoot 50 caliber here. We're not here to shoot BBs. We want to always have a big 1, 2, 3 goals in front of us. If you have those and you concentrate people's attention and efforts on those, it tends to hedge against people, with so much time on their hand, they go try to invent the new gimmick. Big problem.
Good questions.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you, Governor Daniels and Professor Ford, for the great exchanges tonight. One of the questions that I have in both the policy, government, and education space is trust in institutions. And that can be split into two baskets. There's the perceived lack of trust in institutions, that people will automatically go to the lowest common denominator and assume the worst. Then there's the actual issues, the competency issues, both in government and education. So both in your tenure as governor and in your tenure as president of Purdue, how did you deal with that specifically from the public, not just stakeholders, but your average person out there?
It is maybe the central question. I hope I dealt with it a little bit. I was talking about public confidence. I could have said trust, it's probably a better word for what I meant. And once again, I think the key elements include a absolute visible commitment to the highest standards of conduct, behavior, and so forth. A visible commitment to delivering effectively those assignments that you've been given or that you have undertaken on behalf of the public. Competence, we talked a lot about that. To me, one other part was absolutely doing what I said I was going to do. I'll give you a couple examples. Not only did we, as I said, try to be very clear and specific about our recommendations and our goals and policies, and then go try to actually do it, not just walk away from it. Here's a really good example. I mean, it means a lot to me, at least. I had told the state that this is the only public office I've ever run for or intend to. People were perfectly reasonable to assume, no. Politicians, they're always on the make for something else. And, but it was true. It's the only job I was interested in. I wasn't interested in legislative office, just wasn't for me. I actually I've expressed the fact that I think the most important sector of society is the productive sector that makes the other two possible, and so forth. I was sort of thinking I'd go back there, but I know the last ad. I always made up my own ads. I mean, I spoke for myself. I wrote them, unless it was somebody talking about me. I wanted it to be my words. And I know the last one, when I ran for reelection, I said, hey, Mitch, here with some good news. This is the last time you'll have to watch me in an ad like this. And I said, it's the only job I ran for. It's the only one I'm interested in. If you hire us again, we'll give you 4 years and we'll do these things we said we do. I really wanted to deliver on that. So people came around and tried to get me to, run for national office. And ultimately I thought about it. But a huge reason I didn't was I wanted to be, that guy who actually did what he said. Goes back to trust. I wanted to finish the chapter on that note. Oh my God, he actually meant it, right? And I didn't run, for senator or something else. I changed my mind. No, nothing like that. The single data point, I can't think of an exception. But the single data point I think I felt the best about late in our gubernatorial service, I think it was the Pew Foundation, maybe one of the big national organizations, did a 50-state survey. And they asked people, how much do you trust your state and how much confidence do you have in your state government? And we finished second at 77% to, I think it was South Dakota. And I said, I don't even know what government has to do in South Dakota, So there's probably nothing there's probably no feedback we could have gotten that I would have valued more highly than I did that, because it sort of summed up so much of what we've been trying to do and so much of what these great questions have led us to talk about tonight. Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So you're launched apparently on a little public service career. Good for you. And I would urge you to keep thinking just that way. Whatever I do, let's hope it's conducive to people feeling okay, even if I disagree. That person there's trying to do the right thing. They're telling me, so they're talking straight. They're telling me what they really think, and they're going to try to live up to their words if it's possible to do so. Yeah.
Other questions? Be ready. If you don't ask them, I'll start going again. Dr. Larson.
We're just going in order here, I think. This little question group
She
here.
looked like a professor. I thought maybe
The research director of the Whitburn Center.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so Sam Larson, research director of the Whitburn Center. Thank you for coming. So I'm just going to say it, and I say it to my students. Good government can be really boring. So what I mean by that is the clean water that you're drinking up there is because of good government. I hope you got here on time on your flight. If you did, it's because of good government.
5 minutes early.
5 minutes early, even better, even better. I'll give the flight, crew some props for that. Right. 10 minutes at the DMV. It's boring. And I find it interesting.
It wasn't boring to our citizens who used to spend all day
Exactly.
there.
Exactly.
When I ran for office, I said to people, people go to an Indiana license branch with a box lunch and a copy of War and Peace and hope they don't finish them both before somebody knows they're there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to that point, my question is really focused on how do we tell this story and get people to come along with us and invest in good government? Because I think right now, to the conversation we've been having a bit in your conversation, the division that we're in, the lack of trust that we're in, it seems like, we're in kind of this era where people really like to focus on what they're against and the problems. And I think with the Whitburn Center, we're trying to focus on cross-partisan, partisan solutions. So how do we get there?
Yeah, well, I think centers I love this, what I've learned about your center and its conception, and every state should have one. And particularly, by the way, I particularly like the fact that you concentrate on local government, because you can make an immediate difference there. I mean, that's an easier human scale, and you get at it more quickly and all that. As I said, here's a role for you're probably already performing, but finding the good and praising it. There are examples, and people need to know that and have those held up. And on the other hand, say, but maybe here and here and here, we're not achieving what the public deserves, and we shouldn't accept that. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be said with the sort of vitriolic in the vitriolic fashion that's in fashion right now, but you can be firm about it. I mean, doggone it, people should not be, as I said, resigned or tolerant of this. You know, this will betray, you know, my own, I guess, philosophical outlook, but I always felt that if we took a dollar from a free citizen, we better have a good reason to spend it. I used to play this little game in like high school classrooms. I visited a ton of them, and I'd go around and say, anybody got $5 bill? You know, young Mike pulls one thing. I'd stick it in my pocket and keep talking and walking. You know, class starts laughing, and I'd pretend to be what? Oh, that $5. I said, well, you know. I want you to notice something. Mike here is less free than he was a minute ago. He's $5 less free. When he had that bill, he could decide what to do with it. But now I'm going to decide, you know, because I think I know something that's good for Mike. So I better be right. I did give him the money back, by the way. So I better be right about that. It ought to be something that's publicly necessary that we really have to do together. There's a lot of those things, but it better be one of those. And then, you know, it's not incidental whether we actually do that or not. That's a duty, because we deprived him of some freedom, the most precious thing that this society is built around. And that's frequently exactly what we have to do. But boy, you know, some big responsibility comes with that, if you think of it that way. And I do. So, you know, as Alex Haley used to say, find the good and praise it. Good research can do that. There's more examples than people think. So, actually, some stuff actually works. You know, we did a thing when I was at OMB. You know, we couldn't get Congress to pay any attention to it, but we set up a complete performance review for the federal government, all the discretionary programs, 500 and some discrete programs. You know, like federal government had 43, I think that was the number, job training programs at the time. It's probably 143 now, mission creep. And so I used to say, I really wish I knew which 3 or 4 really delivered. Because we got to do much more of that. And by the way, I wish I knew which 5 or 6 or 7 aren't getting any results at all. We got to stop, move the money. But nobody knew. So, you know, you set up some pretty common sense things like how many graduates of the Job Corps or Head Start or training, how many people who go through those programs get a job and keep it X months, you know, simple things like that. And there's huge variability. So now you got to translate that. Of course, Congress doesn't care. They know somebody authored the bill for program number 43, and he doesn't care that it's a bust and doesn't do any good and wastes money. Got his name on it or his pride of authorship. But anyway, you have to start there. And you know, I certainly believe that closer to the ground, people will pay attention to that. So highlight what works, expose what doesn't, and make the argument that, hey, folks, let's just do what common sense dictates. I don't know.
Oh, great stuff. Embrace the boring is what I say. Devin, one of our undergraduate political science students.
Thank you, Dr. Ford and Governor Daniels. So throughout your speech, you frequently mentioned the need for counterexamples to combat the poor examples of public behavior, civic rhetoric, essentially. Brooke and I here organize events on campus called Bridging the Divide.
Brooke told me a little about it.
Okay, she told you a little bit about it.
Yeah, excellent.
And the James Carville to her Mary Madeline, essentially. It's fun. And
I know them both, and I never could figure out what Mary saw in Grant James, but
all the other young students here have no idea what I'm talking about. So in the events, we have young students from diverse political perspectives discuss complex issues. Beyond what we are doing already, what do you think we can do on the campus to affect positive change towards students practicing good rhetoric?
Well, the little bit I heard about it, I love what you were doing. I guess I will say, in a way, it's a shame something like that's necessary. It ought to be the standard operating procedure here and at all campuses for that. And again, more and more people are alert to this. There's a fine fella. We're not related. We have the same last name. He's the president at Johns Hopkins, wrote a pretty good book this year. And he was worried about the lack of either both civic understanding and civic participation. And one thing he pointed out, I hadn't thought of this, debating societies was once one of the major extracurricular activities at every school. Like it absorbed lots and lots of students. And, debate contests and all that business, and it's sort of gone away. Bring it back. It'd be an easy thing to bring back. And it, of course, is based on people often making an argument they don't agree with. But, can you make the argument? You get assigned, right? Whatever it is, capital punishment, yes or no. And so, things like that. And your projects is a little bit like that. Next month, sometime, I've been asked to go over to University of Virginia. They're having a big conference on these kind of questions, free speech and all. And the professor, who I guess is helping organize it, and certainly the one who contacted me and asked me to come, said that they have a program there which is called something like Argue with a Professor. That's not the name, but that's what it does. And they set up regular forums where students come in and professors have volunteered to come in and debate things. It shouldn't have to be this way, but we've gotten to this point where too many young people are either have been intimidated about doing that or are just fearful that I better not take a chance, better just keep quiet here, or I got this question, but I don't think I better bring it up because either the professor or the guy in the seat next to me is going to jump on me for it, right? So I think that we need active initiatives like yours. And hopefully if we get enough of them, I mean, you can change the culture of a campus a little faster than some things because people rotating through every 3 or 4 years. So if a school that got some momentum behind that, in 2 or 3 years, students coming in might accept that. I might understand that as, hey, that's just the way it is here. We're supposed to have give and take, et cetera. So go for it. And I would say in this case, I'm for mission creep. Go ahead and, expand it.
I like it. Consistency is what'd you say? The simple mind. Yes.
That's mine.
Other questions? Please, Devin.
So you were kind of alluding to students being afraid to be the one to step forward and being afraid to, I don't want to step on anyone's toes or ask the question, then get laughed at. I'm guessing when you were an advisor to President Reagan, you were a young person. Well, obviously you were a young person at one point, but did you experience any imposter syndrome?
I'm glad it's obvious.
Did you experience imposter syndrome where you had to recognize, I am that person to take the initiative and I'm the one who can fix these things right now?
Well, I hope I'm being responsive here. There are jobs where it's your job to decide what we're going to do here and then try to make it happen. And then there are jobs where that's not your job. And but there are places where, people get confused. As I used to tell people at OMB, I said, just remember that I got exactly the same number of votes for president as Brad Pitt, right? Like 0. So you have to be, careful about the fact that if you've signed up for a team, hopefully that team is open to and cultivates a lot of debate. Oh, we had that in the Reagan administration, big time. But there was also the understanding that once there's a decision made, we're going that way, whether you like it or not. And you see, I see far too much of this, these days. There's a lot of the very human temptation people fall prey to. People in Washington, they want to show how much they know, so leak, and it's very irresponsible. It's a betrayal of trust, and so you'll, on your way to one of those jobs where you're responsible for deciding, you'll probably have the other kind of job. And remember your responsibility. Ultimately, if you've signed up and you've been given a role in a cause, in a campaign, in an administration of some kind, ultimately you're there to make happen what that entity is committed to making happen. Am I answering your question, or
Yes. I suppose my question really is about, you see that position open, like city councilman.
Yeah.
Stating it, no one's running for it. What was the moment where you saw I could get on one of the empty?
Again, I hope it would start, I've told a lot of colleagues or folks asking a question like this, it needs to start with the why question. Why would I do that? And I should not be in the answer. In other words, I have no problem with people say, I have a passion for this or that, right? I always wanted to be in public service. That's all good. But the why question should be outward directed. What's wrong with this town? Or what is, how could we be a lot better place here? What problem ought we fix? And if you need to start with that. And then, then you should ask yourself, now, am I really the guy? Am I the right guy? Maybe Brooke here would be better at that. And I should encourage her to do it. That's a different matter. But I guess that's at least that's the way I think about it. Hey, look, we're all human. We all have ambition. That's good. That's just fine. But when you get, especially when you're thinking about, again, asking your neighbors, asking your fellow citizens to entrust you with authority and their dollars and all that business, the right place to start is with a why that has to do with them or us, not me. Or so says I.
Thank you. I guess one last question.
Well, this is actually more of a comment. You talked about wasting taxpayer dollars. I would just like to say that I think the defense system and the war machine are some of the biggest waste of taxpayer dollars.
Well, we do waste a lot of money there. It's a very important problem, and it's subject for another seminar. But on the other hand, I will say, and this is that we've gotten ourselves into a very bad pickle in terms of our national security situation. The first duty of any government, whether it's President of the United States or the mayor of Oshkosh, is the physical safety of the people to whom you're responsible. And for the first time in a long time, I don't like coming to this conclusion, but we are, and there's all sorts of much wiser, more knowledgeable people documenting this on a daily basis now. We have allowed ourselves to get into a pretty precarious position, and that's a problem because we've also outrageously disserved the young people in this audience and all of the rest of the country by spending trillions of dollars on ourselves. I'm talking about people my age and the next generation down, and passing the bills along to them. If we didn't borrow that money and invest it in the future, you could make some case for that, at least up to a point. So now we've got two problems. We've already spent ourselves broke, and now we have this, I'm afraid, this obligation. But everybody who is worried about national security would agree with you that the way we do it now and much of what we spend is grossly misspent. And that's a disservice. That's a very serious incompetence of government of the kind we've talked about.
Well, any last comments for the crowd before I wrap things up?
They can't wait to get out of here. I don't want to prolong their agony. No, I just want to say I enjoyed being here very, very much. I'm very impressed with the first of all, with the center and its operations. And as I said, every state ought to have one. And I don't think too many do with exactly the same mission. So that's really, really good. And the university itself, press on. I do believe that at a time there's the shakeout in higher ed is going to continue, but it needn't come to a place like this. You're obviously performing a very valuable service, and if you have to take some hard decisions to keep the ship upright and solve it, do it. But much of higher ed is not delivering value, but when it does, there's nothing more valuable. And you're clearly one of the schools that meets that test. So thanks.
Well, thank you. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you for coming. And quick plug for everyone, if you're interested, if you've really enjoyed this conversation, which how could you have not? It was excellent. October 8th and October 15th, the Whitburn Center is hosting, along with the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trusts, 2 de-escalation trainings to help people navigate difficult political conversations. One's at UW Milwaukee on the 8th, one's at UW Green Bay on the 15th, but both are virtual as well. You can go to our website and sign up for those. And October 21st, we're having a session about how to get to an MPA. So if you're an undergrad looking to figure out how you're going to go change the world, sign up for that and meet a couple of our MPA grads and find out how to make that happen through our MPA program. So thank you very much, Governor Daniels.
Thank you.